This video is about deconstruction, deconversion, and discrimination. Hi, and welcome to the Secular Scriptures. I'm Gail, and today I'm triggered! Whee! I'll be talking about how Christians fail members of their congregations who leave the religion and then fail to listen when these former members say why we left. If you are a Christian hearing a deconstruction or deconversion story and you are just waiting for your turn to throw a Bible verse in, you are not listening. We have some definitions. Hearing is the faculty of perceiving sounds. 2, an opportunity to state one's case. Listening, to give one's attention to a sound, to take notice of and act on what someone says, respond to advice or a request. To make an effort to hear something, be alert and ready to hear something. This video is a reaction to a reaction because we just love doing that on YouTube. I'm not going to clip in their videos. I want you to go watch both of them in their entirety when you have time. Start with Lauren's deconstruction story on Unreligiously, and then go to Melody Freeman's off-the-cuff reaction to that deconstruction story. Lauren is a former Christian fundamentalist evangelical agnostic who left Christianity in her 20s, though the process started in her teens. And Melody is a pom-poms for Jesus Christian who seems to have a fairly healthy relationship with her own faith. Full disclosure, I got mad near the end of Melody's video and I didn't finish the last 10 minutes. I was already kind of steamed because she wasn't listening to Lauren. She may have said something revolutionary at the end and I missed it, but my own emotional boundaries are important. I'm not here to mess up my blood pressure. I'm here to heal my religious trauma. I want to be clear that both women can speak for themselves and their stories are their own. I am only focusing on Melody's reaction to Lauren's deconstruction story, the difference between hearing and listening, and where Christians fail those who leave. In the first 3 minutes of the video, Melody has tossed out a no Jesus, a Jesus is the answer, and a Jesus is the light of the world. I barely caught what Lauren said because Melody just kept jumping in to shake the Jesus pom-poms. At the 5-minute mark, she has issued a health threat, so that's really special. At 7 minutes, we get a didn't know Jesus, because apparently Christians can't imagine that anyone would be a real Christian and leave. Like, oh my God. Here is our first major hurdle in the conversation between Christians and former Christians. Please pay attention to what Lauren says this was like for her. Now, obviously, I can only speak from my own experiences in this, so I'll share a story, because we do love stories here. At the Wesleyan Church, there was a young man with thick blonde hair in his mid to late teens who was really struggling with his faith. At that point, I was going through the same struggle. He said something and I didn't. I remember the congregation prayed over him a lot. One day, he left crying. I followed him out and sat on the pew in the hall with him and we spoke briefly. He said he just didn't believe anymore, and his heart was broken. He couldn't reconcile the Jesus of love with all of the hate in the Bible. I never saw him again, and I hope he's well. The sermons after that were about falling away, lukewarm Christians, the devil deceiving, and not being on fire for Jesus. Isn't the goal to not be on fire? Anyway, I think of that young man now and then, and I wonder if he's happy. Did he go back to a different denomination, or like me, is he out for good? Back to Melody, she says she's surprised that Lauren had a relationship with God. And I'm just dumbfounded here because my own story seems to be an exception, not a rule. Most people who go through a deconversion process do so to get closer to God because they want to know Him, love Him more, etc. They want a deeper understanding, and that understanding can make or break their faith. Now, it's important to note here that roughly 60% of Christians who embark on a deconstruction process will stay in the faith. They may hop over to a different denomination, but the majority will remain Christian. 40% will leave, either for another religion or to agnosticism or atheism, which is around 12%. I will also mention that most American Christians will never read the Bible. They'll read select passages, but only between 12 and 20% of Christians will ever read the Bible cover to cover even once in their life. Only 5 to 8% will do so more than once. There's a reason why we have a saying in the atheist community, the fastest way to make an atheist is to read the Bible. So Lauren did have a deep relationship with and devotion to God or Jesus, and Melody completely disregards that. Lauren says that leaving the faith was devastating. Melody disregards that because she doesn't want to deal with the cognitive pain of the idea that this could happen to a, quote, real Christian. And I'm sorry to tell you that this happens to real Christians all the time. Y'all need to sit with that. And yes, you do have to eat your vegetables. We are now 11 minutes in, and Lauren says that she tried her best to make God proud, and Melody reacts with an ugh. And she says 3 things that I want to highlight, and I am paraphrasing here. She claims that Lauren is engaging in religion, not relationship. Now, obviously, I cannot speak for Lauren. Please go watch her video, but this is a classic example of the Christian not listening to what the ex-Christian actually said. Melody is disregarding Lauren's testimony because she doesn't want to deal with the emotional pain of the idea that a real Christian couldn't leave Christianity. It's denial. Number 2, it's not a race for perfection. I agree. This is true, okay? I actually love this. This is healthy. This is good. More of this, please. And unfortunately, again, this is an example of the Christian not listening to the former Christian. And I think this is a problem of a real-time reaction video, but it's part of the danger of hearing but not listening. So it's story time. The expectation of religious and moral perfection was a major crack in my own faith as a kid. I had a toxic stew of bad and harmful theology and some pretty bad aces. And while I can walk into a church and appreciate the architecture, I still want to hiss at it. Now, I won't because I'm an adult with a few ounces of self-control. But the church was the thing that made my outside trauma so much worse, and the church dished out some heaping helpings of their own trauma to me. One of the big ones was the age of accountability. Every day from age 5 to 8 years old, I prayed to die before I turned 8 so that I could go to heaven. When I woke up on my 8th birthday, I cried all day because I knew I was going to hell for sure. I want to hug little kid me, but she wouldn't have appreciated it, and someone needs to respect that poor child's boundaries. Melody's 3rd point was no one will ever be good enough. We'll go right into talking about why things likely went the way they did for Lauren, and many of us like her. But this statement and its close kin, we're all sinners, is hugely damaging to certain personality types. So let's move on to that now. We have Possum here. She is all wet because it is raining. At the 13-minute mark, Lauren brings up her anxiety and religious OCD. Now, some disclaimers. I am not a medical professional. I have a minor in psychology from over 25 years ago, so that and 4011 will ring up some bananas for you. And mental health conditions are not a lone cause for deconstruction and deconversion, but they are a contributing factor in many people's lives. With that out of the way, let's start with some definitions. You know I love me some definitions. So, OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder, is a mental health disorder that affects people of all ages and walks of life and occurs when a person gets caught in a cycle of obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions are unwanted, intrusive thoughts, images, and urges that trigger intensely distressing feelings. Compulsions, also referred to as rituals, are behaviors or mental acts that an individual engages in to attempt to get rid of the obsessions and or relieve the anxiety caused by the obsessions. The term rituals refers specifically to compulsions and does not overlap with the religious or with the rituals inherent in religious practice, although in this case they can. In general, OCD is diagnosed when these obsessions and compulsions become extremely time-consuming, cause significant emotional distress, and may greatly interfere with the day-to-day functioning and interpersonal relationships. Religious OCD, or scrupulosity, is a form of OCD where individuals have intrusive religious or moral thoughts that trigger extreme anxiety and the need for compulsive behaviors to find relief. Common symptoms include fear of sinning, excessive guilt, and compulsive acts like repeating prayers, seeking constant reassurance, or overly scrutinizing actions to ensure that they are correct. Treatment typically involves a combination of therapy like exposure and response prevention, and sometimes medication to address the underlying anxiety and obsessions. Please go read the first link in the sources in the description box to learn more about scrupulosity. Anxiety is a feeling of fear, worry, and unease in response to stress or a perceived threat. It can manifest as physical symptoms like a rapid heartbeat, sweating, and restlessness, and may or may not have a clear, identifiable cause. When anxiety is persistent and severe enough to interfere with daily life, it may be a sign of an anxiety disorder. Now, I want you to pause a moment here, and I want you to think about these mental health conditions. How do you think these things will impact someone's relationship with their faith? Does a child or teenager have control over these disorders? At 17 minutes, Melody minimizes the negative health impact of anxiety and religious OCD. More Jesus isn't going to fix these issues, it's going to exacerbate them. Therapy and medication may help should someone opt to go down those routes. She is right that this is not a Jesus problem. This is a mental health problem. As it happens, one that is incredibly common in the deconstruction space and across religions for a variety of reasons. Deconstructing and deconverting can literally be life-saving. On a related note, for some people who have left, having someone say, "You were never a real Christian," or whatever variation of that phrase a defensive Christian opts to use, is not helpful. It is actively harmful. I'd really like to see Christians rethink this approach. If you are the type of person who says this, you are actively harming someone to protect your own ego. And you need to stop that. At some point after this, go to H.G. Roberts' channel or buy his book on monsters and phantoms. This is a heartbreaking illustration of how religion, and specifically Christianity, can be harmful to certain personality types, and how these doctrines and dogmas can cause religious trauma. This is not exclusive to Christianity, but Christians really need to gain an understanding of this. I do like what Melody said about having a firm foundation in God or Jesus, and then when the very human institution of whatever church fails, and it will because people are people, someone will be less likely to have a crisis of faith, and I paraphrased that. This is, however, a very mentally healthy and adult perspective, and children don't usually have a choice about where they go or what doctrines they're learning, and fundamentalists are not generally going to seek out mental health care for their children. This is a little bit out of order, but Melody also bounces between threatening hell and promising love. This is a big issue. That whiplash effect between threats and adoration is a huge problem within Christianity, but I think I will save it for another video. Melody seems to have a relatively healthy outlook on religion, and I'm wondering if this is a doctrine difference, a cultural difference, or a brain difference, and it could be all three. The whole conversation with a friend relationship with Jesus was definitely not how I was raised. God or Jesus was billed as this stern, abusive father, thought police, security camera authority figure who kept a tally of good and bad acts and would damn one to the flaming depths of hell in an instant for the least infraction. Roll that into end times BS, and every Sunday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and it was like going to our own personal horror movie, which was totally great. I don't think Lauren got that level of hellfire and brimstone preached at her, but I get the impression that it wasn't that far off. Perfectionism was the expected norm, especially for girls in my churches. This, coupled with "we're all sinners," is really going to mess with a child with OCD and anxiety. Around 24 minutes in, Lauren mentions a Bible passage about doing things for the Lord. It's like all works for the Lord or something like that. And Melody is like, yes, she likes this. Okay, fine. Having a higher purpose for your work is great. No problems with that. But now I want you to stop and think again here. You need to layer on religious OCD and anxiety, and you should be able to see where that's going to lead directly to religious trauma, right? Right? At 27 minutes, I totally agree with Melody. People should be able to move to different churches without negative social repercussions. Lauren was from what I'd call a mid-level high control group. That is still definitely runaway territory. Hers wasn't as extreme as mine. Thankfully, nobody tried to past tense her for leaving. But it's still all sorts of red flags. We're talking about a 16-year-old girl who has basically been workhorsed into exhaustion because the adults in her church took advantage of her lack of boundaries and then ostracized her when she asserted some. This was a teenager trying to break free from a high-control group with the least amount of drama possible and trying to hold on to her faith at the same time. Melody wants Lauren to frame this narrative as a relationship with God in her recounting, but Lauren is agnostic now, so it does not make sense for her to speak about this from a Christian perspective. Christians, please stop projecting. Melody criticizes Lauren for not being close enough to Jesus while looking for a church community at the 35-minute mark. And yet again, we have a case of a Christian not listening to or not understanding the differences in doctrine. Lauren was looking for fellowship with a capital F. That's a big thing in fundy churches. One of my church leaders said the single dumbest thing ever, Jesus can't hear you pray outside of church. Now, while that is absurd and contradictory to many other things he said, it should give you an idea of how important the church is to some of these high control groups. Again, I'm not saying that Lauren's church was like that, but I do get the impression from her other videos that they were sort of a we're the only real Christians kind of church. That is a boatload of emotional manipulation to keep butts and seats and wallets open, and I want you to keep this at the front of your mind. Lauren was a child and a young adult with anxiety and religious scrupulosity while this was going on. And while I acknowledge that Melody was doing a live reaction and probably misheard, Lauren did not say that she went to 10 churches. She said that during her hunt for a new church, she went to a specific church around 10 times, no one spoke to her, and she was rebuffed when she tried to participate in the greeting ceremony. It wasn't like she walked in the door, sat down once, and then walked out. She put in the effort to become a community member, to get to know people, and she felt rejected. That's valid. Okay? It's valid. These two scenarios are not the same thing. If I go somewhere 3 times and no one talks to me, I'm not going back the 4th. My time is valuable. I'm also a woman over 40, and I do not give a fuck anymore. Welcome to perimenopause. Before I get to my last point, I need to reiterate that multiple times throughout this deconstruction story, Melody did not listen to Lauren. She waited for an opportunity to slap a needs more Jesus sticker onto Lauren's experiences. If you are a Christian engaging in that behavior, that tells the person who has exited the religion that you do not care about them. You do not care about their experiences, their reasons for leaving, or their life. You just want to win a game. That is not okay. It's not okay from a social perspective in any other situation, and it's definitely not okay from a religious perspective, and you need to stop. Allow me to point out another contradiction in the Christian mindset. Melody said it herself earlier in the video, so I know she understands this. You can present the gospel to someone and it's up to God to do the rest. Anyone who has been through a deconstruction process knows the gospel. We know it. We know it backwards and forwards, okay? There's an atheist joke that you need to be a potty trained to accept Jesus, but you need a master's in theology to leave. The Bible is usually the problem, not the solution. Are you listening? Did you hear that? Did you understand it? It is not okay to blame a literal child for being exploited for labor in a church volunteer position. The adults in the room ought to have had the good sense to put the brakes on there, but they didn't. This is on them. This was also part of a high control group. That does not make them not real Christians. It makes them Christians in a high control group. Any group can become a cult. Any group can become toxic. Any group can become a high control group. This has nothing to do with doctrine or theology and everything to do with people. Now, on to my last point. Lauren said her main breaking point in her young adult life was when her bisexual friend was basically drummed out of church. Melody broke out the hat and baton for the hate parade and nipped right in front at the 40-minute mark. Why do so many Christians pick which sins to acknowledge and which to ignore? Melody said she worked on a Sunday. That's death by stoning. Why is being bisexual any worse than working on the Sabbath? I'm certain most of you are wearing mixed fibers. Have you enjoyed shellfish or bacon or cheeseburgers? Those are all abominations. Sex before marriage. That's a death sentence for a woman. Of course, you could also marry your rapist if that was the case. I was actually terrified of that. Now, let me ask, just out of curiosity here, how much have you paid for your slaves, which you may own? And do you intend to pass your female slaves' children down to your children, or do you want to sell them instead? Christians ignore all of these other commands from God with very good reasons, and yet they get stuck on the gender of who bumps uglies. Why? Why this? You Christians cast out our queer friends for how they were born, and then you wonder why we leave with them. My mother's church hated black people and Jewish people. My first Baptist pastor said that dark hair and skin were a mark of sin, and that the Jews killed Jesus. Both churches, of course, had to ignore that Jesus was Jewish too. And his statue had dark hair, and yet somehow Jesus was without sin. Racism and anti-Semitism are unacceptable now. Why is hating the LGBTQ plus folks still okay? I don't understand this. We found our dividing line. I'm amazed I made it that far before the hate popped up. The earth is round. It's billions of years old. It revolves around the sun. Evolution is an actual thing. The fossil record is real. And human gender and sexuality are not choices or sins. They're just one element on the natural spectrum of being alive. Dude. Overall, I am disappointed. Again, predictably. Melody illustrated the failure of the church quite well. All Jesus, no human. Someone's greatest pain is just a game of duck hunt where Christians shoot a Bible verse at it. No understanding or compassion, no self-reflection, no desire to pause and think, hey, maybe my behavior is part of the problem here. People who deconstruct face pressure and harassment from their church members, their family, had a very painful time in their lives. People who deconvert lose their jobs, their communities, family, friends, entire social networks. While it's not as bad today as it was decades ago, the discrimination that evangelicals and non-religious people face is still very real. We lose business opportunities if we don't give the right Christian code words back. We lose friendships. Family gatherings are an exercise in self-control and social endurance. Jesus loves you, but the Christians sure don't, and they'll make sure you know it. Bravo. Good job, guys. So now that I've told you everything wrong with this type of reaction, how do you make this right? Well, first of all, stop being a dick to people who leave for their own survival. This behavior is not love, it's passive-aggressive manipulation, and you need to stop. Was that too mean? Let's see. Stop being a dick to people who leave for their own survival. No, that checks out. Learn to listen. Once you really learn to listen, then you can start to recognize the harm that is baked into many faith practices. After that, you need to implement harm reduction strategies. You can do that on both a personal and a systemic level, but if that's too woke for you, maybe just go back to step one and stop being a dick. Thank you very much for joining me on this episode of the Secular Scriptures. Please like or dislike, subscribe, share, comment, do the bell thing. This video was brought to you by the super secret Jesus decoder glasses. Good luck finding them because they don't exist. And I'll see you all next week for some sibling rivalry and lentil stew.